This conference will now be recorded.
There we go. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining RTO9 and the Sustainable Events Forums for our Creating Sustainable Events webinar today. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available on our industry website, tourismtalk.ca, under the workshop tab. All attendees are on mute for this webinar, or should be on mute, so if you have not muted yourself, please do so. There will be an opportunity for questions and engagement, at which point please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. You also have the option, of course, to enter questions into the chat box. My name is Laurie McIsaac with the Regional Tourism Organization, Region 9, better known as RTO 9. We work with tourism partners throughout the RTO 9 region to help facilitate visitors to our area. Joining us today and presenting is Natalie Lowe from the Sustainable Events Forum, TSEF. Natalie is a 34-year hospitality industry veteran and an entrepreneur for the last 17 years. She has worked in gaming, hotels, attractions and events, and operations, sales, and marketing. She is a certified meeting manager through Meeting Professionals International, and she founded the Sustainable Event Forum with the mandate to educate, inspire, collaborate, and act, and host Earth Day for Event People every April, of which I attended. Her online school, Sustainable Events for Busy People, has had over 300 students complete the course and is used as the sustainability curriculum for event students at Ryerson University since 2019. She has also had podcasts, Planners for the Planet, her podcast, Planners for the Planet. Natalie is often featured in industry publications as a thought leader on sustainable events. She will be providing an engaging look at steps that event planners can take to move toward hosting sustainable events. And I know right now we're probably thinking, where are these events and when are these events going to happen? Trust me, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I know it can't come quickly enough for any of us, but now is the time to be looking at strategies for moving forward with initiatives like this. So, known for her creativity, leadership skills, and love of learning, Natalie will discuss creative solutions which are evidence-based, effective, and most importantly, practical. She'll spark ideas and motivate you to action on environmental and sustainable initiatives for events we're all hoping to attend in the future. Natalie, you bundle of energy, I'm going to turn it over to you now and let you, and you've got a colleague helping you out, Stacy, in the background. I'm going to hand it over. Welcome.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Well, I hope I can live up to that introduction. Holy doodles. Thank you for your kind words. And thank you to everyone who's giving up some time on this beautiful day. My promise to you is we hope to keep these beautiful days coming if we act appropriately now. So you know who I am, and thanks for your time today. So I want to tell you why I, a little event planner here in Niagara, decided to become so invested in climate action. And that is, this is actually a picture of my hometown, which is Slave Lake, Alberta. And in 2011, Slave Lake burnt to the ground. And the odd thing about that is it happened in May, actually right around this time. It was the 15th to the 16th of May was when the fire happened. The forest around Slave Lake was dry and the temperatures were in the 30s, which when you grow up in Northern Alberta, that's very unusual. And so those were the climate conditions that allowed a fire like this to happen. My niece, her husband, and their 4 children lost their home. And what happened was you lose your home, it burns down, the place that you work burns down, you grab everything that you can with your hands, you get into your vehicle, you drive to Edmonton, and the next week the bank says, hi, we'd like our mortgage payment. And so I became an activist in advocating the banks to give mortgage relief to the 750 families who had lost their homes. Because of the scale, the insurance companies couldn't assess and pay out the homes fast enough. People were still having to pay their mortgages. And so that was my taste of activism. But as we learned later, the fire was really caused by climate change. And that was quite a while ago. I mean, it was 10 years ago now. And what started to happen was more disasters were coming through. And again, we were being called to support the victims and to act on these things. I was getting a little tired of always coming in at the end and fixing things. As an event planner, I was actually working on an event at the Toronto Island when it was flooded. Cost us about $63,000 in lost fees and changes to move that event. And I was tired of always fundraising for people who were losing their homes or being displaced due to floods or fires. And so I decided, well, actually, I kept thinking somebody should do something. And it finally occurred to me that when nobody was doing as much as I thought they should, I would get involved. I come from a family where everyone's in oil and gas. If they're not in oil and gas, they ranch for cattle. So this is not an easy fit for me. There was a lot of hard lessons and a lot of learnings that meant that things that I learned when I was younger had to be changed. I had to change my outlook. And so I always say to people, if I can become a climate activist, anybody can, because it didn't come naturally to me. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we do at the Sustainable Events Forum. It's actually only 18 months old. And really it came out of frustration. I didn't think that we as an events industry were addressing the, oh, I apologize, it's my neighbor's car, the alarm's going off. So I apologize for the background noise. So about 18 months ago, we started TSEF. We did 2 live events before the pandemic hit. Since then, we've done a total of 7 events, including a couple that were kind of cool. In February, we did a moonshot where we challenged 2 teams of event professionals to do carbon neutral events. We wanted to see if they were possible. And we found out that they were. And what surprised us was it wasn't as difficult as we thought it would be. And we told them that they weren't allowed to use as many offsets, or they had to limit the use of offsets. So we learned a ton from that. And then what we did was we did Earth Day for event people, which we do every year. And this year we changed up the format a little bit. We had 10 destinations compete to see who was the most sustainable. And we chose 10 destinations really sort of for their sustainability, but also because we had an idea that they were doing things at a municipal level that the events industry wasn't talking about. So we wanted to have the climate coordinators within the municipalities starting to talk to their tourism colleagues who were often just down the hallway. So here's the little secret that Lori probably knows because she was at the event. We weren't actually looking for the most sustainable destination in Canada. I mean, at the end of the day, probably Victoria, having gone carbon neutral as a city, probably wins that. What we were really trying to do was trying to have destinations and event planners and event suppliers start talking about the sustainability of your products and services and your location as part of the RFP process, part of the selection process, part of the planning process. That's what we were really trying to do. And we're happy to see that this is becoming a conversation, mostly because the companies that are hosting events and their associations that they belong to are starting to take their sustainability pledges quite seriously. 2,300 companies in 2020 during a pandemic have pledged to go carbon neutral by 2050. So we feel like we're making some progress, and part of what I do is talk to anybody who will listen about how we can make changes within our area of influence. And for us, it's the events that we do. So I've tried to boil it down a little bit to what is climate change. I think at this point we all know, right? Climate change right now is simply an instability that is happening to our climate. Our natural ecosystems can't keep up. We know what causes climate change, and that is we have these lovely gases that are the equivalent of putting on a sweater, or in the case of methane, a ski jacket when it's already warm. So the earth is being enveloped by these. So really simply, what we can do is stop creating these gases that are creating an accelerated heat. The question is, how do we do it as event people? So that's the not so easy part. And I want to talk to you just for a second about a cool idea that Ford is doing. So this is an F-150 truck. It is the largest selling truck for years, for decades. It's been the largest selling truck. And Ford did something really interesting. They took their hybrid style vehicle and they created it so that there's a generator on it. So back by the tailgate, there are plugs, just like you would see in your house, where you can plug things in. So let's say that I live in Texas and we found out that a little bit of snow causes our energy grid to go down. We can back our truck up into our driveway, plug some extension cords, and run everything in our house through my vehicle. So this created an interesting scenario where I might care nothing about the environment, but I would buy that hybrid vehicle for its technology because of the added value that it brings. So I would say Simon Sinek has told us to always start with why. I'm going to disagree with him on this one insular item, and that is I don't care why people do things that are green at my events as long as they do them. And I think there I'm a mom and I'm being practical. So let's talk a little bit about carbon dioxide and methane. So here we have carbon dioxide we hear about all the time. We hear about carbon accounting. We're going to talk about carbon accounting a little bit. 81% of the volume of greenhouse gases are carbon. Only 10% is methane. But remember we talked about the sweater and the ski jacket on a 30-degree day? So carbon dioxide is like I'm wearing a jacket and I go outside, it's warm. I'm going to be a little warm. Methane is like I put on my toque, my ski suit, and my hat and mitts, and I'm covered from head to toe. 86 times the warming of CO2. So why am I telling you this? Because you need to understand two things. Carbon lasts for years in they estimate thousands of years in the atmosphere, but methane only lasts 12 years. So 86 times. So our fastest route to keeping the temperature where it is, or stemming the height of the temperature, the rise of the temperature, is to cut our production of methane. So that's important for us to know because I'm a businesswoman just like you are, and I want my actions to have the highest possible return. So let's look at a little bit what people think sustainability is. So they think it's oops, I apologize, I double clicked there. So we think it's marching and we think it's talking to government and we think that it's all of these outward things. Really, as a sustainability person, I spend a lot of time on my computer crunching numbers. So in order for us to understand our sustainability, just like we understand our profitability, we have to look at the numbers. The other thing that people think is that sustainability is very complicated and that it has all of these pieces that you somehow have to weave together. You have to cut down on plastic, you have to reduce all of your emissions in multiple areas. The truth is that by concentrating on a few key areas, it's actually quite simple. The problem is it's hard. It's hard to give up things. And so that's why I like the concept that F-150 is created, where there's a byproduct to giving something up, which is that you get a use that is greater than what you had before. So I'm going to throw a lot of complicated concepts at you, which, okay, sustainability, people say they're complicated, but they're not actually that complicated. But I'm going to give you a very simple tool to use. We call it the 5 R's. Now you're used to the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. I looked at this and I thought, I don't know, it's kind of missing the point, an over-reliance on recycling. How about if we just refuse some things? And we saw that certainly with the revolution with straws. We're certainly going to see it with plastic. It's already started. So we use, as part of the course, refuse, replace, reduce, reuse, recycle. And we always put recycling last because it's an imperfect system. And just to show you that I do have a sense of humor, I'm going to show you some canned wine and some toilet paper. So let's talk about recycling just for a second here, and that is recycled toilet paper. We cut down, National Geographic has the latest stats from 11 years ago, where we cut down 27,000 trees a day to make toilet paper. This is recycled toilet paper, and actually at our first event, we gave it away. This was our giveaway. We gave you recycled toilet paper because paper that is recycled from your office is made into this, and it saves a tree. Now people come back and they say, you know, it costs a little bit extra. I mean, we are people who pay $7 for a coffee at Starbucks, but we don't want to pay a couple extra pennies per roll for toilet paper. And I think we really need to challenge ourselves on some of that. If we look at recycling numbers, only 9% of plastic is ever recycled. I'm using Ontario statistics. 30% of glass in Ontario is recycled, but 86% of aluminum is recycled. So when we talk about quick, practical things, ordering cans instead of plastic or glass bottles is an easy way to make that swap out. The reason why aluminum is recycled at such a high rate is because the municipalities sell the recycling commodities and they get a great price for aluminum. Glass is problematic. The handling of it drives up their insurance rates. It breaks. And there's not a great market for glass. I was surprised to find out that you can actually recycle glass into a lot of things. There's 2 or 3 things. One is like reflective paint. So simply switching to aluminum can help a lot. Now, I am being a little cheeky here. I do actually have soda in a can. Both of them are empty, I promise. But this is actually wine in a can that was done by Stratus Winery. Their sommeliers say it does not affect the taste or the shelf life of the product, and it comes in a convenient glass size. Now, we've seen these, in a convenient serving size. We've seen these in the US for a while, but I think that that's a great direction for us to start to move towards. So again, remember, only 9% of plastic is recycled, 30% of glass, and 86% of aluminum. So let's get into the hard part. Today, we're going to look at the choices that you can make and how you can make them. Now, I said that I wouldn't give you a listicle, but at the end, I've given you a list of easy things to do. But overall, we know that climate action is very simple. We have to reduce our emissions. So how do we do that? We need to count our carbon or create a carbon budget. And then we need to use something. So that's the counting carbon. We're all going to learn a little bit about carbon accounting. Then we're going to talk about why your grandmother had things figured out. I don't know if your grandmother was like mine, but she would save everything. And sure enough, I have like elastic bands saved here on my desk where they reused things. Nothing was really ever thrown away. And we created a system where we have a linear economy and we need to revert to a circular economy. We're going to talk about that in detail. Then we're going to talk about your own backyard, because climate action is actually very local. We're going to talk about why actions are different in Saskatoon than they are in Quebec, why they're different in Canada than they would be in Australia or the United Kingdom. And then we're going to talk about doing something, because as Lori said, we have 4 pillars for the Sustainable Events Forum. They are educate, inspire, collaborate, and action. And we always say, without the last one, the other 3 don't count. So we're going to talk about what you can actually do. Now, sometimes people say, well, Natalie, you can just tell us what we need to do. But that doesn't work for every event or every situation. So we all have to come up with our own plans. I am always here to help. I'm happy to help anybody to create their plans and to work through them. We have a ton of resources. Stacy's actually going to put a link to our website where all of our resources are there. I'm going to try and give you a ton of those, and then we'll help you. TSEF will be here as long as we need to. hoping that we will become obsolete because everyone will become a great climate advocate. But let's talk about why I'm interested in making you a climate guru. So sustainability is actually a numbers game. If you and I today went zero waste, we would affect nothing. But if we can get, as my younger sister once said to me, we don't need one Greta Thunberg, we need a million Greta Thunbergs, to which I interpreted that as, Natalie, go out and find 999,999 more Gretas. But we need millions of people taking those small steps in order to create systemic change in the way we do things. So we also need bolder actions and more leadership in different areas. So, you know, you have an option to do two things. If you see yourself as a leader, you know, take the first step. If you see someone else taking a leadership role, support them. Because one of my favorite videos is Derek Sivers. It's called The Lonely Nut. I was a lonely nut. I was out here talking about sustainability until the first person said, hey, I'm going to listen to you. And once that first person steps forward, they're actually the true leader, because from them, everyone else follows. So you've got some options there, but certainly try to support people that are doing leadership. I want to talk just briefly about some of the bad things. I know sustainability can be a real bummer. I do not want to bum you out before your long weekend, but we're kind of stuck in Canada, is that we are a natural resource economy, something that we're desperately trying to evolve out of. But the other thing is, you've probably heard about all these fantastic plans that are in place. Now, my best course when I was in university was counting. I loved counting the numbers. And when I count the numbers, I have to agree with the scientists who say the net zero by 2050 is not going to make it. It's kind of like if your year end was in December and you had all your revenue in the first 2 weeks of December. It's too risky. And so what we have to do is we have to start taking drastic action now in order to lessen the pressure that we're going to feel as we get. The other thing is we're hitting some tipping points that are pretty key. So we won't talk about that too much because we're here about solutions. So I'm going to give you a 30-second primer on carbon accounting. What happens is the greenhouse gas protocol, which Stacey's actually going to drop the greenhouse gas link into the chat box. The GHG protocol oversees how companies and organizations can count their emissions. And the UNFCCC also has a template for a budgeting process where you can work through a carbon budget. And I think they call it their emissions calculator, but I call it a carbon budget, I guess, because I'm a business person. So I know you're all really excited to do more accounting, but what they do is they take all of the 5 different emissions and they translate them into carbon. So methane, as you can imagine, depending on where you do, if you put out a kilogram of methane, that is converted into 86 kilograms of carbon. Very similar to how we do currency exchange. So that process is not going to be unknown to you. Now, the reason why we actually have to count our carbon is because every area has different carbon emissions. So we talked about Saskatoon and Quebec. In Quebec, their energy grid is 97% green. So to focus on energy within the province of Quebec is less helpful than if you concentrated on it in actually the 4 Alberta, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, and Nunavut, who are still burning 40% to 50% of fossil fuels for their energy usage. The rest of Canada has gone fairly green. But it's the basic idea that just like in a business, if you don't know where your revenue is coming in or where your expenses are going out, you can't manage it. So I want to show you an example of how we've done it here for TSEF. And we learned some interesting things that I'm going to share with you, a couple of quick tips here. So we determined that for our February 8th event, it was about 2 hours. We included all of the planning meetings, all of the committee meetings, and all of the teams meetings on Zoom. And then we offset them. We actually use a gentleman in Northern Alberta, Carbon Farmer, and he's registered and certified. We don't tend, we're going to talk about offsets a little bit later, but we don't tend to do future reduction of emissions or protection. We want to see something that will actually draw carbon out of the atmosphere. Here's 2 things that we learned that was really interesting. Delete your old emails. Orange, a French tech company, did a study, and they said if every person in France deleted 50 emails, it would be the equivalent of having 2,000 homes run their electricity for a month. I think something like that. It was a phenomenal number. And what we found out is when you use email versus, say, Slack or another program, that email is held on servers all around the world. So not only are you taking up space and energy on your computer, but you've got these servers all over the place that are also using up energy. So delete your old emails. The other thing that we found is that those of you right now who are on but have your cameras turned off, you've reduced your energy consumption by 96%. So those famous Zoom meetings that we're all doing right now, turn your camera off if you're not speaking. I have a hard time with my meeting professional friends. Everybody wants to have their camera on all the time. So I try to set a good example, but you as a host can actually just ask them all to turn their cameras off and really reduce that. So that's something that you can use until we get back to actual live events. So I want to talk a little bit about your municipalities. In my assessment right now, I believe that the key to climate action rests with the mayor, not with the premier, not with the prime minister. And that is basically because of how we feel the effects of climate change. The cities and the towns are the ones who are cleaning up the mess. And so they are highly motivated to reduce future liabilities by taking climate action now. The Climate Reality Project runs out of Montreal. They have a cool thing that they do. It's called the National Climate League, where they basically have all of the municipalities across the country compete. Of interest within your area, actually, Kingston really stood out for how much you embrace electric vehicles. You have the highest per capita electricity recharging stations for EVs. So that was kind of interesting. Also on their website, they do a podcast with McGill University, and they go into detail about what each of the areas mean. You're going to hear me talk about at the end connecting with your local climate coordinator. Due to some grants with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, or FCM, almost every city and town in Canada has a climate coordinator. And wherever your event is held, it would be good to connect in with them. They always know what's happening right within your area and what the stress points are, particularly when we start to talk about waste, which we're going to get to in a minute here. So we're going to talk about why your grandmother was right. And that's really a big fancy thing that they call the circular economy. So we talked about how we live in a linear economy. We extract resources, we use them, and then we dispose. What we want to get to is more reuse of things within the economy. So this little chart here sort of explains in a fairly simplistic way how we want to utilize these things. And here in the events world, what we're seeing are things like signage. So let's say that before we used to have foam core boards made up with signage everywhere. Now, you can simply utilize an LED screen that you can change, and you can also run that LED screen. I'm going to show you a picture later. We did our first 2 events completely off the grid. From the movie industry, we stole the idea of using solar generators. So now that LED screen can be used for all of our events. And so it goes through that process of having a lower carbon emission. I sometimes use the idea of growing a tomato, eating it, processing it, composting it, and then regrowing it as an example. But I think for event people, we're looking at the things that we buy that we then throw away. And one of the really useful things that we do in the course is we ask everyone just to look at their garbage. What's in your garbage right now? And I will confess right now, I do have a paper recycling and a trash can. I always find things that, and this is kind of my weakness. I have a weakness for markers and different colored pens. But I've started thinking, like, what happens to this? There are 7 billion people, 7+ billion people. If I throw one of these plastic pens out per day, there's like a potential of 7 billion plastic pens ending up in a landfill. And it sort of makes you start to think about everything that you touch. So next, we're going to talk about what you can do in your own backyard. And it was hard to get individual information for each of your areas. So I concentrated a little bit more on Canada, because right now in events, we're hearing a lot of information coming out of the UK and a lot of information coming out of Australia, which is fantastic, but their systems, their national systems are set up differently than ours are. So here, this is directly from Natural Resources and I think what's it called, Environment and Climate Change Canada, directly off their website. This is where Canada's emissions are coming from. So oil and gas, transportation, no surprise there, buildings, electricity, heavy industry, agriculture, waste, and others. I like how they put waste in with others. I'm going to assume that none of us are in oil and gas production. And that very few of us are touching heavy industry. But we're going to maybe take a look at transportation, agriculture and buildings, electricity, and certainly we are going to take a look at waste. First, we're going to start with, oops, I think I might have messed up. So we'll come back looping around to it. There's no problem. So let's look at the actions that we can actually do that will reduce some of those areas that we looked at, right? Remember how I said we want to hit the high return areas. So if we look at that, our highest return area is certainly going to be transportation and agriculture. I'm also going to introduce you to drawdown.org. I don't know if any of you know drawdown.org, but I love them because they take this practical stance. And so I've gone through all of their global ranking of actions, and I've tried to connect them with things that we actually use in the event sphere. So here you can see absolutely number one is reduce food waste. And that is, just in case anyone's not clear, food that goes into a landfill and is covered over goes into an anaerobic process that releases methane. So that methane, which we've already explained why it's so terribly, terribly bad, is the reason why we want to reduce this. So plant-rich diet, again, I think the cows are lobbying for us to have a plant-rich diet. Mass transport, airplanes, bioplastics, recycling, composting, and of course, recycled paper. You can check out drawdown.org. They're always updating their action items, and they've got some really interesting write-ups on cool different things that, I mean, the first time I read about biochar, I had no idea what biochar was. But then when we look at the areas that we can affect, what's our action plan? So then I go back to this simple, what can we refuse to do? What can we replace a high carbon piece with a low carbon piece? How can we reduce things? So less travel, less food, less waste. What can we reuse, like our signage? You know, how can we make those swaps? And then as a very last resort, what can be recycled? So the aluminum that we have as those products can be recycled, and in what priority do we want to make those material decisions? So let's look at transportation. And I know that transportation is a big concern for people who fly a lot. I'm going to be honest with you, I am more concerned with the person who drives 40 kilometers to work and 40 kilometers back than I am about a twice a year airplane trip. I know that goes against the grain of so many things, but I believe in Canada we need to focus more on our transportation infrastructure. I would love to take the train from St. Catharines to your part of the world. It's actually not easy to do. The train leaves here once a day at 5:05 a.m. You have a 3-hour wait in Toronto, and then you can get into it. So we need to invest in transportation, and I believe long-term that will help our events. The other thing is the way that our transportation system is set up with buses in Ontario. I can go to a municipality and I can get a hybrid or an electric bus that can effectively move 50 people in one vehicle, but I can't do that through a private bus company. And so I think we need to look at some private-public partnerships in order to move our transportation forward. During my day, I'm a DMC, so I do a lot of transportation. And I also think that, you know, we look at it more as how can we make this the best experience for the attendee, which is correct, but I think we build a lot of waste into our transportation. So let's talk about flights just for a minute, because I know it concerns a lot of people. The Suzuki Foundation actually has a great link on their website, and they, so Stacy's gonna plop that in there for you as well, so you can take a look at it. Why I like theirs, they give all the regular stuff, right? You want a direct flight, you want to take carry-on, you want to fly economy, not business class, which breaks my heart, but that's okay. They use a European website that ranks different airlines for how they're doing on sustainability. Air Canada and Air Transat were actually rated fairly well. Air Transat primarily because it's charter, so their load passenger per carbon emission is quite good. WestJet, I think that they miscategorized them, but it's interesting to watch. You can see year over year, the Canadian airlines are at least trending in the right direction. So if you're going to fly international, an interesting website to take a look at, and they're all doing it completely. They're a bunch of aeronautical or aviation engineers. They're doing it completely free as a service for the planet, which I appreciate. So is there anyone here that has kids in the Limestone School District? You're probably more familiar with this program than I am, but I presented, this is Dan Hendry, he's with the Limestone School District, and Dan and I presented to a bunch of climate leaders. I was presenting about traveling more sustainably. He was talking about this student program. The reason why, as an event person, I like Dan's program is he took a systems approach to making a change. So very quickly, for those of you that aren't familiar, the Limestone School District and Kingston Transit did a program where in grade 9, students are brought in and shown how to ride a bus, how to use a bus pass, how to give up your seat, what the etiquette is, how to load your bike on the racks in the front, how to work out your route. And then they tweaked it a little bit. So they found that students weren't always going and getting their free pass because they had to go down to the transit office. So then they moved the passes from the transit office to the high school. And if you think about that, that's the systems event design that we work with when we're going through either a festival experience or the check-in of a hotel, or the cycle that a guest takes as they work their way through our event or our venue. And I thought that they did a fantastic way of addressing all of the issues and then continuing to finesse it. Systems thinking is a better way of addressing your sustainability items than simply doing one-offs. And I'll give you a quick example of that. A friend of mine, Landon Logie, does the events for Tayo. She's now, gone out on her own and is subcontracting, but she did their first event and they had all of this composting that they were doing. So they set it up on the event stage or the venue. They set it up so that everything was separated and it was properly sorted, and the garbage truck came at 7 o'clock and picked up their garbage, and the recycling truck picked up the recyclables, and the compost was picked up separately. But then the compost truck gets to the City of Toronto composting facility and it's closed. So that driver can't leave until he unloads. So the compost actually went to the garbage, to the landfill, and was dumped in. So Landon shared this with us as an example of how she'd try to one-off instead of thinking through the entire system that it had to go through. And by doing that, she needed to follow, like we talk about for the circular economy, needed to follow the life cycle of the items she was using, as well as the solutions that she was recommending. So that is, and what a great segue, because food waste is, I would love for people to guess how much food we waste in Canada. Does anyone want to take a guess? I'm gonna open up my chat box and see if anyone, come on guys, give me a number. I'll make it easy. It's gonna be between 30 and 80. Does anyone want to take a guess at how much food waste we have in Canada as a percentage? You're a very quiet crowd, so I'm going to tell you it's actually 58%. 865,000. Yeah, pretty close. It's 58%, so almost 60%, 2/3 of our food that is grown and imported into Canada is wasted. Interestingly enough, most of this happens in two places, in our homes and on the growing side. The grocery stores only account for 4% of food waste, but it's still huge amounts. Now, the question that I ask Lori Nickel, who is the executive director of Second Harvest, is how much is happening at hotels and events? And she said that she doesn't have a number for it, but she suspects it's large. So we're going to look at some ways that you can reduce your food waste at your event. So certainly I think it's odd that we serve the exact same portion size to everyone, and that in most cases we're not allowed. I mean, I'm not a very large woman. I'm, 5'5" if I stand up really tall. So do I really need to have the same portion as someone who is, 6'2" and 220 pounds? So we could look at smaller portions. We could look at reducing some choice so that we have fewer leftovers, particularly for our festivals and our events and for our offsite events, using more shelf-stable products. We absolutely should start to make composting the norm. And where we can use foodrescue.ca. So Second Harvest created what they refer to as eHarmony for food and people who need food. And you go on and you register your event, and they will connect you with someone in your area who can use your event. Now, if anyone wants, okay, with strict food handling practices, it is near impossible to donate food from restaurants and banquet halls to those in need. I'm going to challenge that, Lori, and I'm going to tell you that there are protection laws in place for donated food in every area in Canada. We don't talk about it and we don't know about it, but foodrescue.ca will walk you through it. And Lori, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make a connection with you and Kira Toffelmeyer at Second Harvest, and she can walk you through. It was actually an Ottawa woman by the name of Sandra Wood, who is the executive director of the Canadian Medical Association. And Sandra was appalled at the amount of food waste, and the lawyers for the Canadian Medical Association ensured that legislation was passed in every single district area in Canada so that we could donate. We don't talk about it, and it's interesting. So my sister is a hotel GM, but her last assignment was in Thailand. I mean, she's been overseas for 25 years. So when I was telling her about this, she gave me the same answer. She's like, no, we can't do it. Well, maybe you have to start educating your venues about what we can do. So, but I'll remind me, Lauren, I'll make you an introduction. So let's talk just a little bit about saving those poor cows and having more plant-centric menus. That is something that 5 years ago would have seemed impossible, but cattle is a major source of methane, and the process itself is very high in carbon emissions. Now, I'm not saying give up meat. I'm just saying that we can start to offer different options. And I always take the stance, I don't want to shame meat eaters. I just want to celebrate some vegetables. And I rely often on the fact that I'm a mom, and it's like, eat your vegetables, they're good for you. Your doctor will tell you that, your sustainability person will tell you that. So, you can make two people happy at once by just having more vegetables on our menus. And I'm not a huge fan of the fake meat products. I'm simply more pro vegetables. Interestingly enough, we got introduced to the Canadian Center, it was the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. We actually did an event with them at the Royal York talking about grass-fed beef. And I believe, coming from Alberta, that I'm always going to eat beef, but what is the most sustainable beef that I can eat? Interestingly enough, the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef was actually supported by McDonald's. That's where the funding came from. And we learned a ton about the difference between, eating beef in a beef area that it's a more natural product versus, traveling overseas and insisting that you have beef in an area where it's foreign. I also, it's my thing, I want to support local, and I want to support those ranchers, and I want to support those farmers. So that's my soapbox about. So let's talk about energy. Efficiency Canada says that 40% of our Paris Accord agreement could be reached simply by making our buildings more efficient. So for owners, that's certainly an option. But what about those of us who don't own the venue or have control over the venue? Certainly we can ask in our RFPs for energy efficiency, but here's some ways. So this is our famous little solar generator. We did 2 events, a full day conference, as well as an evening event using completely off the grid generators. And they actually rented them. So we used AV Canada for this. And they rented them from a movie supply company in Toronto. And we found out when we did the moonshot that you could rent these solar generators everywhere in Canada. We didn't need to rent them for any events in Quebec because the energy grid is so green. But it was really eye-opening to us that our events industry had been using older technology, whereas the movie industry was sort of showing the way. And one of the great things that's come out of TSEF is we try to incorporate other areas. We always try to have some scientists in there and some people from different industries who can show us some different ways. Now, I will tell you that for our full day event, we came really, really close to running out of power, but we tightened things up and unplugged a few lights and we were able to go. But again, it was a lot of math working out exactly how we how much draw we needed in order to make, whereas before we never thought about it. You simply plugged it in, you used whatever energy you needed. I promised you a listicle. So I'm going to go through this listicle very quickly, and then I hope you have some questions. On tsef.ca, you are going to see some free resources, and Stacey's going to drop that in as well. We have in there some RFP questions. So anytime you go out for a product or service, to include sustainability questions. The Event Industry Council is run out of the United States, and what they said is planners aren't asking for sustainable services and suppliers aren't offering them. And so what we want to do is we want to start that dialogue. I would say create a green committee. If you look at the other people that are on this session right now, it's kind of your core green committee group. You know, have one in your neighborhood, have one at work, start one at your kid's school or at your own school. And because going sustainable on your own is really hard. The only thing that we say to people is we never shame, right? You do what you can. It's those million people taking a small step, not shaming someone who, I mean, let's admit it, we've all bought a plastic bottle of water or used a plastic bag, right? That's not the point. We can't shame people. It's never been a great motivator. The other thing is to connect with your local climate coordinator within your municipality. And the sustainability people, all these climate people, they're kind of like how IT people used to be. Sometimes they're in the basement, not a lot of people talk to them. They would love to have, they would love to have some input. And they think us event people are very sexy and cool. So carry on that myth that we're all, not how much time we spend with a spreadsheet. You can do a team outing. And this was something actually that we suggested that the Rotary clubs do. Go to your waste treatment plant, go to your recycling facility or a sewage treatment plant. I did a session webinar with Lake Ontario waterkeepers on sewage systems, and I do not look at my plumbing the same way. I mean, it fundamentally changed how I view these things and the care and attention that I take to them. I don't know if you want to start with sewage. I would start with recycling and just learning how things are recycled and how you can help them. Again, I go back to the systems thinking because we don't want to get stuck with what Landon had. One of the things that I'm working on with a colleague out of Washington, D.C., she just finished doing the climate summit with John Kerry, and we're going to have a mess ups, a sustainability mess up session that, will come and we'll talk about the errors that we made and how we fix them and how we can work together. The last, number 6, is when you create some small sustainability steps for your attendees or within your system, do what Dan did and try to remove the obstacles or the barriers. And the last one is something that Gary Graham at the Hotel Association of Canada is always telling me, and that is tell your story. I know earlier I said that I disagreed with Simon Sinek. Don't start with why, just have them do it and not care what the why is. But the reality is your attendees and your suppliers care about your why, which is why I always talk about Slave Lake burning to the ground. It affected me fundamentally. I was scared and I was frustrated, and that propelled me into action. And people want to see a little bit of that vulnerability and they want to see that authenticity. So when you tell your story, the only thing that I really, really caution people on is don't whitewash it, right? Warts and all, right? Confess to the things that you're doing, that you're struggling with, or if someone has a complaint, then address it with them with authenticity and ask them to help. I call it a very Canadian, or I guess my US counterparts call it a very Canadian, or it's like, you're right, we messed that up. Well, how do you think we could do it better? At the end of the day, we're not going to save a tiny piece of the prairies, or we're not going to save Canada. We are all in this together globally. So, we all have to do our part, and we've got to be a little bit humble about it. I think, Lori, everyone might be just sick of hearing me talk at this point. I hope you guys have some great questions for me. I'm willing to answer anything.
Thanks very much, Natalie. I actually have a question. Oh, there we go. I'm sorry. I thought I pressed that button. Okay. So on behalf of those that are not here, and please, anyone, if you have questions, feel free to either unmute yourself or enter it in the chat room. How do event organizers, given the current COVID climate, which, we're in this for a while yet, even though the borders and doors will open a little bit more, people are going to be very cautious. So how do they balance taking steps to holding sustainable events when COVID protocol is to use single-use items, which in the sustainability world, that's not really the way they should be going?
Right. Well, to be fair, my colleague, Laura Bickle at Ignite Magazine, which many of you will know, it's sort of the events world magazine in Canada, wrote an excellent article on it. And Stacey, if we have a link to that article, we can either put it there or we'll put it onto the website. Single-use plastics are not a great option for the virus, to be honest with you. I mean, when we tested everything, we found that actually the virus lasted the longest on plastic. So, this concept that single use is somehow better is a fallacy. And it's something that you can work on with your local health authority who will have, they're the ones that will have authority over your events and your event structure. But I know when we called our local authority, they said that, you know, utilizing the dishwasher and covers and, you know, having more self-serve versus service was certainly the answer. But we're going to give you that link to Laura's article, and I think that will answer a lot of questions. But it was just something that started to happen where people thought that plastic and throwaway was somehow better. You know, and the question that I would really challenge people is, when you get that, you know, we've all checked into a hotel and that glass is covered in plastic, but who washed it and who touched it before it was covered in plastic? So I think we've got to really look at that.
Thank you.
Sorry, I hope I wasn't too harsh on that, but
No, I know from planning events in the past myself that it's such a challenge to figure out where that line is.
Yep.
You know, if we're, for instance, if we're holding an outdoor event that has a significant amount of food trucks or food vendors, how do we kind of put that together and make it more sustainable? What are some of the easier, I guess, steps, Natalie, that could be implemented?
Yeah. Well, what I would suggest is that on our website, so when we did the moonshot on February 8th, the caveat that we gave to the teams was they had to make all of their resources and their processes completely open. And that is completely free. There is no paywall. You can go there and you can download their process. And one of the key people on that is Marie Zimmerman. She worked on that moonshot team, and Marie is the executive director of the Hillside Festival, run out of Guelph, and she's a good friend, and they have been carbon neutral, I think, for something like 20 years. They will actually be carbon negative starting next year. And Marie basically has figured out how to make those festivals as low impact as possible. And we insisted that the moonshot teams follow the COVID protocols, which at that time were actually more stringent, right? It was a lot of surfaces. Now they're more concerned about ventilation, and our vaccination protocol was not as advanced. So I think if you're looking for those practical, direct, this is how they did it. And we had them work through their process. These were not event people. These were people that, you know, worked on the fringes of the event. And so they had, of the event industry, they had to learn a lot, and they wrote about what they learned and how they calculated it. So I would go there and I would download it. And you know, Marie is at all of our events. She's a huge supporter of TSEF. And it was actually Marie and Landon and I met each other because we were presenting at CMEE, which is Canadian Meetings and Events Expo. We were supposed to be presenting last fall. The two of them have some great concepts and ideas. You know, again, I would go to the website. It's there.
Terrific, thank you. It's 2:05, and in the interest of everyone's time, I know I did give us enough time for a lengthier Q&A, but I, Natalie, personally want to thank you for giving me, and I'm sure the other attendees, a clearer picture of what sustainability means. And I don't just mean, you know, the word itself, but I think many of us look at it from one direction or through one lens, and it, you know, when you broke it down into transportation and food waste and the others, it really became a little clearer about, one, what our part is. Whoops, and there's my phone. what our part is in this, and where we can look to make those changes that we need to make. And I think the biggest was some of the biggest takeaways for me are, one, to, of course, and you and I talked about this prior, is to keep your expectations on a smaller scale to get started. Yeah. Right? You don't have to go to zero waste all at once. You can start with smaller steps. Certainly visiting your website can give some further information into how to take some of those steps. I loved your comment about deleting old emails. I am notorious. You could probably go back 10 years and I still have them.
All of us planners are, and I presented last week to an education group, and we were on this conference for 2 or 3 days, and one lady said, due to Natalie's inspiration, I'm sitting in the dark with the lights off deleting emails, and I had to laugh. But you know, I think the most important thing to remember is a lot of people say, well, as long as you're doing something. I keep going back to the thing that I'm a businesswoman, I'm a mom, I'm a busy person. I don't agree, just do something. You have to do high impact things, because
Right.
you can wear yourself out replacing your plastic grocery bags, which are important, don't get me wrong, but we're in a climate emergency, right? That's federally, we are mandated to be in a climate emergency. So if your house was on fire, you wouldn't run to the neighbor and ask to borrow a tablespoon. You'd say, give me your hose, right? And
Right.
so we have to find those high impact. Food waste absolutely is going to be the #1 issue. I'm going to connect you with Second Harvest and Kira and get you guys squared away. And then I just ask everyone who's here, tell somebody else about this, pass it on, right? I need, 999,000 more Gretas to go out and to inspire other people. And I know, Lori, that you guys will do that at RTO9. And thank you for having me.
Terrific. I appreciate, Stacy, you're in the background, but I appreciate you managing the chat room and giving us all the links that are available. And again, you are at TSEF.ca, and for the purposes of this webinar, /RTO-9-resources, which if you're in the chat room, you can see. Natalie, I'm sure we'll be speaking again, because I'd love to mine your brain of other ideas for the future. But I appreciate you taking the time out today. And again, if anyone would like to view the recording or to share the recording of today's event, you can find it at tourismtalk.ca under the workshop tab. Please give us about 48 hours and we'll have that up for you. And if I can help in any way, please do reach out to me. I'm just going to quickly put my email address in the chat box. Whoops. Tourism. Yeah, it's not working. Tourism.ca. There we go. I apologize, everyone. But part of what I'm doing with RTO9 moving forward is to help event planners, with finding resources to help them, whether it's be sustainable or to work with partners or whatever that is. So once again, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who attended, and I'm looking forward to using this webinar in conversations that I have with partners moving forward.
Absolutely. And just a reminder, when you buy your May 2 for a long weekend beer, to get the aluminum cans as a personal favor.
I saw a recipe in LCBO magazine for wine can chicken. So there's my goal for the long weekend. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of this beautiful sunny day, and we appreciate you taking your time. Take care.